All right, everyone. Great to see you guys here this Saturday morning for Modulation Sound Lab. And today we have our special guest, Eric, known as Vincent Sky. He is a hybrid producer, meaning he uses modular hardware synths and DAW. His DAW of choice is Bitwig. And if you don't know who he does some amazing ambient stuff. And I will drop his YouTube channel in the link after we get started. And yeah, welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your process with the crew. And I'm going to now pin you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining. I put together a patch and kind of a work in progress track and did a video of it this morning just to make sure there wasn't any issues you could see. So I'm going to fire that video up here, and we'll spend the rest of the time kind of breaking it down and Q&A and that sort of thing.
That was fantastic.
Sweet.
Nice.
Yeah. Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Yeah, work in progress. I'm trying to crank out a whole bunch of tracks and see if I can put together an EP or an album, but this is probably maybe 80% of the way there. And I got to do, you can tell there's some sections that need to get a little bit more modulation in that, but that's kind of the finishing touch of putting a track together, I guess. I'm happy to kind of do a little run through, just kind of overall workflow, general style, that sort of thing. I'll pause first. Any questions out of the get-go that you're watching, thinking of, or anything like that I can dive into? Otherwise, I can take it.
Keep in mind, he's going to walk us through that particular song, correct?
Yeah.
Eric? And then the workflow, both outside of the box and in Bitwig.
Yeah, so everybody can see my room right now, right? So I've got kind of the central computer system set up here. I jokingly say that the DAW is my clock because it is. I run Bitwig, and then I use Silent Way from Expert Sleepers as sample rate audio clock. So in the modular world, we get audio rate clock just naturally. Typically in a DAW can create a clock, but when that clock is sent over USB, sometimes people will run into issues because USB is not prioritized in the operating system as well as audio rate, the stability of audio rate. So the plugin essentially generates an audio rate signal, just like a Eurorack, any type of voltage-based clock, and that's sent through my audio interface into modular over here, and then the modular receives clock, and from there clock goes everywhere else to hardware stuff. So when I hit play in Bitwig, everything starts up instantly. When I hit stop, everything stops instantly. Arpeggios, sequences, all that kind of stuff, everything starts and stops with the DAW. So it works pretty slick. I'll kind of breeze through this and then we can spend more time talking through it, but everything kind of comes in and out of modular over here for the most part, and then it distributes through. Pamela's new workout also has an expander which converts MIDI signal clock. So I convert that 3.5 millimeter like patch cable to DIN, traditional MIDI cable. That goes to a splitter, and then it splits to DIN to all the different hardware synths. I have zero issues with latency. I have zero issues with DAW jitter. I rarely, if ever, get any kind of stuck MIDI notes or anything like that. So all the things that plague people with MIDI stuff, I never really run into it. And I think it's like this whole MIDI is archaic is somewhat of a myth, but I know it does exist. Mm-hmm. Right now, I only have 3 channels available in my audio interface because I have so much other hardware gear. I only have 3 channels. So modular to me is like a 3-channel or 3 instrument multi-timbral instrument, if you think of it that way. So I have done patches before where I've done 100% of the mixing in rack and brought that into the DAW. But I'm shifting gears a little bit more to the DAW multi-tracking and treating Eurorack as separate little instruments. And I might submix in there, but then I still am bringing those out into 3 separate tracks. There's pros and cons of that. Obviously, if you want to do effects or you want to do things like that on a track, you get a submix. So if you have 2 voices, they can't play at the same time unless they share the FX for that. But otherwise, for the most part, right now, I'm transitioning to that, and I think an ES9 or another type of module will be great because I can get a few more channels without having to eat up the analog channels in my audio interface. Let me do a quick shift over here. So if we kind of break down this patch, as I mentioned, there's 3 channels that I have. So there's really 3 voices that I'm using that are patched right now. You would hear periodically a little bit of like a bass growl, not the big bass, that wobbly bass, but there was like a little bit of a wow. That's coming from the NW1, which is from Waldorf, and it's a wavetable module oscillator. And that I'm sending control voltage from the DAW to the FH2, and that is then opening the filter, which is Cinnamon. And it's also changing the position of the wavetable to create a kind of that wow noise, a little bit of movement there. I certainly could do that with sequencers in rack, or I could do it with LFOs or things like that. I'm kind of find myself shifting away from those types of modules, those utility modules in the rack, and really focusing more on the voice. So I'm kind of starting to move away from that, and I actually love just going into Bitwig, mapping a knob, and then saying, hey, this is my virtual knob that is going to control this, open and close. So that's how that's opening and closing for that voice. There's another main voice, and I can play them, and you'll hear the difference between them. One is STO. STO is going to, in this case, STO is going to, on this one, sorry. STO is going to Popple, and then Popple is running over to Magneto, and Magneto to FX8 for a little bit of reverb, and then back out. And then another voice is the E370, which is running to Forbidden Planet filter. And that is running to the 4MS dual looping delay, and that back out. So for the most part, those are the three voices. I probably would do more, but those, I generally gravitate towards those, and one more, which is my Chaos, my Odessa, Belgrade, Praga voice I seem to use quite a bit. So those are the kind of main voices that are part of this. The Iridium plays a role in this track, and none of the other hardware that's out here does. The rest of it's software. I'll give a little pause for a second. Any questions on the Eurorack piece? It'll make a little bit more sense when we're looking in the DAW too.
Just for clarity, and when you say go back out, so how many do you have a mixer obviously in your Eurorack that you route to your Motu? Is that?
Yeah, I've done plenty of tracks you can watch, like on YouTube, where everything is done pretty much in modular, right? All voices are there, all sequencing's there. So I've done plenty of those, and I've done plenty where DAW is driving everything. So it's whether or not I want to submix down in rack and do all the effects there, or if I want to bring back individual voices and add effects in the DAW. But I'm really kind of trying to keep all the gear here on separate tracks. The most I could really get is 3 or 4 audio channels in my interface right now. But I think if I go optical or kind of light cable for that, I could get another 8 of them or something like that, and that's just the next transition I have to do, so that I'm not limited there.
Got you. So right now, then you have, what mixer are you?
So Praga's one that I use because it's got 4 channels and it has 2 send returns, which is awesome. I wanted to double that down for a little while to get, I basically have 2 of those.
Got you.
And then the rest of them are IntelliGel mix-ups.
And they individually go out to the 3 channels in your Motu. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
Yep. And then I also have an audio channel here. I'll pull up Bitwig here. I have an audio channel that down here is basically a bus out for Bitbox. So I can send software synth audio to Eurorack as well and process it there and kind of create a loop if I want to. So I have flexibility to move audio in either direction, is essentially.
So that's going out. It's not really, it's not really the Bitbox. That's just what you're calling it.
I just named this bus
Bitbox,
okay. Because that is mapped to an audio out of my interface, and those cables run to the Bitbox. And then I can sample from there. I can do, usually what I'm doing is sampling. And I will either create samples from some weird textures or whatever, right? Maybe some percussive things, or usually it's texture, or sometimes like a loop. But I'll sample that in Bitbox, but I can take that. I've sent it to Morphogene before. I've run it through FX8 just to, for the giggles of using FX8 reverb on like a Serum or something like that. You certainly can move audio either way. So here's kind of what this track's setup looks like. A little bit color coded. One thing that I do is I kind of set up a template, like here's all the hardware, and then here's all the modular. So you can see H here stands for HerMod, FH2 is for the FH2 module. This is where I'm sending MIDI out to get converted to CV. And then these are all instruments where I can get audio back, right? So I could send MIDI to HerMod channel 3 and get audio out of Praga, right? And then I've got essentially a hardware instrument, just like any other synth that might exist. And that's kind of how my philosophy with your rec. You know, I started with the small system doing generative stuff, and I'll say graduated to mixing and sequencing all in rack. And not to say I'm graduating from there, but I think I'm shifting, you know, sideways to doing more MIDI based sequencing and sending it this way out and getting audio back and then multi-tracking everything. So I leave these in here. I just activate and deactivate and copy so I don't have to spend the time setting those. Sometimes it gets tedious creating those and setting them up. So they're all here ready to go anytime I want. I'll show a couple here in a second. For the most part, pinkish colors like texture and twinkly things and pads and stuff like that. The iridium is this aqua color. I'm only using one, so it's a multi-timbral synth, so I'm only using one of the layers there. You can see that's going there. Orange is my modular stuff, and then inside of it, green is where the MIDI is being sent out. Don't ask me to explain why I picked these colors or how it works. It's just what's landed over time. So like, for example, here's that STO voice. And you can see like, this is very similar to how Ableton works. You know, you've got a track in a hardware or an instrument track. I can pick where the MIDI is going out. I can choose where the audio is coming back. Bitwig's got a neat feature here where you can send essentially like a pulse, and it will record the audio coming back and automatically set your latency for you. So if you're, you know, trying to do the whole kick drum aligning, you know, the audio to figure out what that number would be, you can just tap the little button and it sends the signal.
That's cool.
Typically you want like a slow attack or a really fast attack for that, so that you get that kind of clicky noise right away. But then because for some of these I am doing a little bit of a sub mixing these, sometimes I'll just create an audio track where I'm actually capturing. If I come back over here, you can see this audio right here on the left, modular 3. So all this audio is getting sub mixed and it's coming out of modular 3 mix up. And so then I can play either one of these. Right, I'm just playing on my keyboard down here below. So that right now is the E370 going through Forbidden Planet. And then if I switch over here, it'll arm this one, and this is the STO Magneto. All of these then will flow up to kind of, they essentially bus into this group where I have then a bunch of effects that I've applied in software. And we can drill down in any one of these, but this is just one example. So I've got a reverb right out of the gate. Sometimes I'll stack depending on what I'm doing for it. I'll stack and set the mix as low or the high or whatnot. Some of the modules I find I have to kind of fit within the style, have to pretty heavy EQ them. I'll get some good harmonics that'll come through. So you can see what I'm doing here with that. And then depending on if it's like a higher voice and I'm trying to blend it in, compress it. And then I can do some kind of cool things where you can see there's a modulator here doing some panning. So if I have a mono voice, I can kind of pan that either side, or a stereo voice, I can, you know, post effects, do some stereo imaging with it too. And then I've got a dynamic EQ afterwards. And sometimes I realize like after an hour, I'm like, oh, I put an EQ before the reverb, and then I put an EQ after, and then I have a delay, and I go back and I'm like, hey, it sounds good, don't touch it. And then other times I go back and I'm like, I need to clean this up a little bit. So I wouldn't say there's any mastery to this other than I made it work for how I wanted it to sound. But this dynamic EQ is essentially like a compressor, but at certain frequencies. So if I know I'm going to get one really bad frequency, I don't have to EQ that out the entire song. That one place where that's going to come in, I could either mix the EQ in and out at that point in time, or use the compressor to compress that EQ back down. dynamically when I get to that point. So lots of these types of effects, it took me a while to, I'll say, get over putting software effects on modular. I felt like I was disowning everybody, that I was, like, kind of what I mean, right? And I
Yeah.
think Jono said it best at Modular World, and that is like, look, it's about making music, and nobody should apologize for what instruments they're using and that sort of thing. So
That's
kind
true.
of gave me the confidence to push through that, and now I go overboard with it. So for example, that's one voice here. So I'm sending two different MIDI, two different channels out. There's two different voices getting audio back to this. And then I use FH2 right now primarily as just the control voltage. So if I want to script in here control voltage and I want it to work exactly the same way every time, like a sequencer, like a nerd sec, or something else would work, that's what I'm using FH2. And what I'm doing is I'm sending CC messages, which is typically what you would use to do modulation of hardware. I've got 4 of those set up to be 0 to 10 volts, and 4 of them to be -5 +5 volts, depending on kind of what I would want. And that's easily configurable in the FH2 module, but for right now, this is working pretty well. So for example, this one here that I've got, remember I said before the NW1 is being open and closed. So if I come look at the FH2 that's here, so under modular 2, this is a different audio feed coming back, the NW1 module. So here's FH2 that I have selected, and here's my MIDI. You can see it's opening and closing that over time. So if I expand the modulation, each one of these up downs is essentially opening the filter and closing the filter. So if I come over here and do, you should be able to hear that little high-pitched growl come through. It's essentially sending CC messages, converting to CV, and no different than me turning a filter knob in the module. I'm just doing it in the DAW. And then on my desk, which you can't fully see, but I've got a MIDI fighter twister, which basically has 16 knobs on it. I'll just take this sometimes and say map and grab this. Now I can turn it with a knob on the desk. So I'm essentially creating virtual or remote knobs for your rack. And then I'll usually play a track, and then at the right time, I'll have it recording the automation. Turn those up and down whenever I want. So you can see how they're drawn in there. They're very, the first couple of them are very natural, and then I'll just copy and paste those once I like it. Kind of pause there. I mean, that's a little bit of the how I set up the tracks, the audio routing, the MIDI getting converted in, and maybe I'll say one more thing here, and then I'll actually pause. If I look at, oh, there's no notes on the NW1. That's just opening and closing. If I look at the STO and the Magneto, just writing regular MIDI notes and sending those through. So I'll just write melodies just like you would for a software synth and send those through. Okay, I'll actually pause now.
Okay, there's a couple people. Can you click on the audio track within that bus? Yeah, I just wanted to see what you had on there.
Nothing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's literally receiving the audio. Typically, I will do that just one time on the instrument track down here. So right now I'm on the the NW1 track. It can send the MIDI out, and the reason it's sending this here is it's just sending a single note. I could get the audio back here. That would work too. I just have set it up this way so that in case I want to submix, it gets confusing when you see it on the Hermod track, but it's actually coming from a different MIDI, if you know what I mean. Like if I send MIDI to track 8 and a different voice is sending it back, it gets a little bit confusing when you submix in your rack.
Got you. Okay, so just to let you guys know, then I know some of you just started using Ableton. This is like where you can group. It's the same thing as using grouping your tracks. Like if you select on multiple tracks up top of Ableton and group them into a bus, it's the same. It's the same thing.
Yep.
MKB, he has his hand up.
Yeah, so well, a couple of questions. The weird one first, I guess. If the DAW police showed up at your house and took Bitwig and you had to use some other DAW, what would you miss?
That's a great question. I think Nick nailed it earlier. I would probably revert to Ableton because I've used Ableton, I've used Cubase, I've used Logic in the past. If Bitwig was gone, I'd go to Ableton. I think the two are very similar. It's ex-Ableton people that left and started engineering Bitwig. So there's a lot more similarities between Bitwig and Ableton than any other DAW I've really worked with. What I would miss is the ease of the effects chain and the modulators. For example, and I can do this whether it's hardware, software, doesn't matter, but I'll just pick something here as a really quick demo. I'll throw Vital, which is a really cool new synth that's out there. Saw wave, right? Nothing fancy. I'm gonna put a filter on it. And okay, there's my filter. What's really cool is in Bitwig, whatever knobs you're dragging, like in order, it leaves them the little history of where they are right here. So I don't have to go back into the synth to do that. But here's the really cool part about Bitwig. I can open up this modulator section and hit plus. These are all the modulators I can use. I can take in synced LFO. I could put an ADSR on there. I could put just a traditional LFO. My favorite's to put like a random on there, or a step sequencer. So I could take like a sample and hold random. So now here's random. You can see it moving up and down. I can sync it. I can make it run, based on time, like seconds, or I could say I want this to run every 16th. Grab this little blue bar right here and take that and drag it on my filter. And you can see the little orange thing moving up and down now. It's modulating it. I mean, for me, it's like, that's just like patching, right? If I were to take an LFO or something, I can visually see what's happening, which is nice. And then, tweak. Do I want it to be a little bit smoother? Do I want it to have some memory, some history in its randomness? Make it bipolar, not bipolar. So there's, make it bipolar. It's going back and forth like a panning thing might. Now when I play. And so then, the next thing I might do is add a step sequencer. So you come in here and now I've got steps that I can draw in. Right? Maybe I wanted to build like a crescendo at a bar or something like that. These modulators are super easy to just whip in. And then the really cool thing is I can go back to my FH2 here and I could grab a modulator for like this might be a bad demo, but I'll grab my modulator. Remember my FH2? So now I'm using a Bitwig modulator to the knob, which is sending CC and being converted to voltage. And essentially I have limitless abilities to do that, right, in the DAW, where I might be limited by the number of LFOs that I have in the rack. So yeah, that I would say the modulator is that. And then the part B to that really quickly is what's really cool is, when you build these effect chains, very similar to Ableton, I could do something like a delay, right? Now here's my, I'm gonna kill these modulators so we can hear it straight. Right, there's my delay. What's really cool is I can come into the any of the input outputs of we'll call these like a little module or a functionality. I can open this up, and instead of building the chain out, I can nest into the chain. So I could put like a chorus into the taps of the delay. So not on the whole chain, but as the delay taps come through, each one of them is going to get chorus as it goes through. Or I could pitch down, maybe do some pitching, and essentially create like a bucket brigade delay as it kind of dies out as it goes or whatnot. But again, those are really neat because you can nest those, and I can integrate that with the rack too when audio comes back in or back and forth. A little long-winded, but that's honestly is one reason, just the intuitive and the ease of use in this lower section down here. It's really nice.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Brian has a question before he jumps in, just so I can give you everyone just a little bit other comparisons, like what he was saying, like with the how the knobs appear in Bitwig with the Vital. The knobs are there in Ableton. If you open up the little arrow when you drop in your VST, it's just that it now shows all of the knobs there. So that's like a plus and minus. You know what I mean? Especially if like you don't want all the knobs, it could be cumbersome to try to figure out which one you're trying to find to modulate. Or if you do want all the knobs, then they're all there and you don't have to go back and click on them. So just as a comparative workflow. And that's really cool that you have the actual plus sign to add the LFOs, for example, versus in Ableton, you just would have to drag in your LFO, like go to your
Sure.
your Max for Live or MIDI excuse me, effects. It's early, sorry. And then and drag in those LFOs from there. So it's in that aspect, I think Ableton seems a little bit more clunky in that way. Whereas Bitwig, it's a little more intuitive, where it's right there for you to kind of click on it, and it's more of immediate, which is pretty cool, I think. Yes, and while you were talking about the sequencer, there was a question from outside of the group, but I thought it would be great for you to answer it in here in case anyone else is wondering, which is, does Bitwig have a stage sequencer that generates MIDI yet?
Like a...
Because I know you threw up that one sequencer. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
You're thinking like a arpeggiator or something like that can generate?
Stage sequencer? I guess. Possibly. Sorry.
I mean, I guess step sequencer was the word.
Yeah, like a stage sequencer. So maybe it is step. So would that be what you just used?
Maybe they're talking about the grid, because I remember there was a request at one point to have MIDI come out of the grid, which I don't think it does at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That I don't know.
Thanks, Nick.
I do know. So like
I
could very well be wrong. I'm not 100% sure, but
okay.
In this track, right, which is an instrument track, I can put things. I know I put a synth here, but I can put things in front of the synth. Right now, it's a preset. It's a third-party developer created like chance, right? So anything I play, if I did 50%, I'm just hammering the key right now, but you're only hearing 50% of the notes, right? So you can put things in front, you know, of the synth too. One of the things you can put in here is like, you know, if you're sending MIDI to it, note delay or note echo, and there's a bunch of different things. I mean, you can put an arpeggiator in here.
Got
right?
it. So
if
it
I
has
hold-
arpeggiator. Cool.
Yeah, so if I, you know, pitch some of these up, just so you can. But then I go back to where Bitwig is great is I'm going to grab a sample and hold and make this sample, sample and hold, right? And then pull these back down. So now you can see this one that's going up. You know, to me,
Right.
just being able to whip up something like that, you know, really quickly. And if I grab this in a couple other places and throw one up, throw it down too, and then I'm just holding a single note. And it's using the modulator now to modulate those steps, right, up and down. Maybe similar to like a Metropolis might do that, or I guess Metropolis would be a little bit hardwired like that, but similar.
Very cool. And just so you guys know, then it's the same way in Ableton with the signal flow. Whenever you're using a MIDI device, you always throw in that pitch or that effect. The sequencer always goes before the actual device. It's the flow of, think of left to right, like how the signal is flowing. But that's really cool, and that's probably like the M185 Max for Live sort of situation in Ableton. All right, Brian, you had a question?
Yeah. So, well, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. It actually goes back to like the very beginning when you were talking about syncing clock, and I haven't done much recording. I just started like thinking about setting up Ableton to do similar to what you're doing. And yeah, I didn't think about the USB lag. And I have a Motu M4 interface, which one of the reasons why I got it was is like pretty cheap, and I needed something new for now, but it's supposedly DC coupled. So I think two of the outputs are DC coupled. So just randomly thinking it, I don't know if Bitwig can do this, if it has like any like CV tools, kind of like Ableton. And maybe Travarsi, this is something you may chime in on as well, but like, would it be possible? Okay. Yeah. Would it be possible to send clock that way using CV going out of one of the inputs? And I'm trying to think of the best way to do that. And would that I guess would essentially be using the audio chain too, right?
Yes. So Bitwig does have a number of
Okay.
CV tools. So it has like a clock reset, which if you look at Silent Way, it's just almost identical functionality that's there. I'll be honest, I was trying to play with this last week, and for whatever reason, I couldn't get the settings in Bitwig. I'm sure it works.
Okay.
Right. That those.
I've tried it that way.
Yeah. I'm sure like if I went, here's my clock, here's my, reset.
Yeah.
On play, I could send the output here. So I have a stereo split, right? Clock run, left side.
I see.
Right
Okay.
side.
So then you select your audio outputs as your destination. Okay. So then over. Okay. Oh, okay. So I guess that's essentially, that's what you're doing. So Silent Way is what you were talking about in the beginning. That's what you use?
Yes. And it's what I originally found. And again, if I was starting from scratch, I'd try to make it work without having to pay, even though it's not that much money, right, for a plugin.
Yeah.
But it's
using the negative. Yeah.
Basically there's output 1, there's output 2, and it's splitting a stereo pair. One's going to the left side, one's going to the right side.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind is that you can't send it out the same channel and split stereo. Sorry, you can't send it out the same channel and use a TRS cable, because there's an issue with the tip and the ring.
Okay.
And I believe you can only use the tip side. So you get one of those splitters and just make sure you use just the tip side.
Yeah.
If you go on Silent Way's site or look it up, you'll find info on it. But the ring side, you can run into like shorting issues and things like that. So.
I mostly, like, I have a bunch of these 1/4 inch to 8 inch just TR cables. Like I use this to plug into like effects pedals. That would essentially be all I would need then. Plug that in, so it's not a TRS, or would that not work?
No, because if you plug into the analog port, even though that cable is just a TR cable, you still have to split off and pull just the ring. I think just the tip of it. If you have the ring as part of it, you could run into shorting issues. So, like plenty of places you can get, I forget exactly what the name of it is, but it's a cable. It's a 1/4 inch. Floating. A black and a red.
With a floating.
The breakout, or we're a floating ring.
Yeah.
All right, floating tip. Jeez.
Yes.
Both, I'm pretty sure Perfect Circuit has them, and I think Detroit Modular does too, but I'm not 100% sure. But if you just search floating ring cable, you'll find it.
Is this the one you're talking about?
Yep, and I believe the
like
black side is the tip.
Yeah, that's how it's labeled.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you can just get these are just HOSA cables, Brian, and they're cheap.
Yeah. What's funny is I think I actually have one of those.
You can use that for Silent Way or with the clock in Bitwig.
Yep, that's it.
Right there.
Yeah.
That's funny. I was using that for some hack I was putting together. Hey, look, glad I got it. And And you were
16
saying
out.
it's just the ring
I think it's just
is
the tip.
okay.
Right.
Just the tip.
It's just the tip, I believe.
Just
You
the
can
tip.
search, and I'll share a link that maybe makes it into the notes
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
with an article on it.
Good to know. I would have been scratching my head on that for a while.
But to
So
go
yeah, on the
back to
back
the
line-
Bitwig, you can set it up in Bitwig with the clock, the same way you use CV Tools clock. The only plus side is the Bitwig has an actual reset. I don't know why they didn't put that in the CV Tools in Ableton. I mean, hopefully it's something they will add.
I didn't realize.
But the workaround in Ableton is you just add 2 clocks, and you use one for your reset and one for the run.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
You set it up the same way. You just put 2 right next to each other in the same chain.
Okay. Sweet.
Cool. Mueller, you had a question before we continue on?
Right. So first of all, if anyone uses a DAW that doesn't have any CV tools and you don't want to buy silent waves, at least if you have DC coupled outs, you can get a CV out if you download the Air Windows VST plugins, which are free. And there's a lot of stuff in those plugins, but there's one plugin that's called DC Voltage, and it does DC voltage, nothing else. And it's basically just a fader in your DAW that you can draw that moves the CV that comes out of your DC coupled interface. And if you automate it in your DAW, boom, you have automated CV from your DAW without any plugins. So that's pretty neat. And obviously the question I would have is, why go to the modular at all at this point? Like, I know it's a nasty question, but I'm curious, like, why would you not use wavetables instead of E370 or the NW1?
The first part of the answer for me is I started with modular, so I have it all, and so I'm still using it. I still like it. The second part, I think, is there are some things that modular just does way better, or there's certain modules that sound a certain way that it would take a little bit more to, like a Magneto is a perfect example. You can find dozens of tape delays, but Magneto is just the ease of going up, plugging something in and turning 2 knobs, and all of a sudden you've got this, multi-tap tape delay echo. Like there's certain modules like that I just won't ever get rid of. I'll keep some rack. So I am starting to pare down sequencers, less utilities like LFOs, things like that. And I'm trying to, and where I do use an LFO, it's the same way as like the Iridium or any other. I might have a patch where I'm moving a filter, and it's just one less thing for that preset, if, making your own sounds, that I don't have to go patch an LFO up, to move something or do that. The challenge with modular is that you can't save a preset. So I either have to leave that patched all the time or, have that as part of a certain rack. So I am not struggling with that, but I am contemplating that in general. Like, do I downsize my modular and make more like an instrument? Waldorf used to have a keyboard that was, I think it's 97 or so HP, and it had a keyboard, it had MIDI in and out, USB, it had a lot of the utilities covered. And then you just put the modules in and you've got essentially a keyboard synth. That whole concept to me actually makes a lot of sense. I could build the voices that, like an Odessa voice, like a Chaos. I could build a really great voice there, put some effects in it, and that'll be a voice that I use just like, a Prophet or a Juno or a whatever other device. And they kind of have their sound that goes with them. I don't know, I'm kind of slowly going down that path, but.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, shouldn't for you, the more you go down that route, shouldn't the actual preset become easier and easier because there's less and less patching involved? So maybe at some point you might want to look at some preset-based routing options. I think there's a couple by now that, where you basically have inputs, outputs, you can internally connect them and save that as a preset and then recall call that, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting like, this is the longest I've ever had a patch ever. And I've had it for 3 weeks. And normally I patch like every week from scratch, rip everything, new track, rip everything, new track. And I'm starting to like these voices and figure out the nuances of them. And then as I build the modulators in Bitwig, I'm keeping that from track to track. And I think there's continuity then if you build an album or an EP, your sounds are similar in that regard too. So I think this is just more me, you know, I'm only about 18 months into my whole musical journey. So it's maturing in that regard and kind of building a sound and kind of, I'll say stabilizing from where before I was like, learn over here, learn over here, learn over here, and kind of grounding a little bit. I'd do a quick time check. One other thing I wanted to show in here, because I know lots of people are probably looking at Macs. Oops, I gotta get rid of these. Macs for Live. Is Bitwig has what they call the grid. I am not very savvy. I bet Nick could school me in the grid here, but basically,
No,
similar fashion. Bitwig has the grid. I can open this up, and you're, you know, like a VCV rack or a reactor blocks or Macs for Live, similar fashion. You can create your blocks, do your patching, and then this in general polygrid then has modulators that I can, you know, send into it, and then get, you know, the audio and add into effects chain out. I don't know enough of the limitations. I apologize, to know, like, can I get MIDI out of it? Like, can I create sub effects, right? Like we were looking at the delay where I can add depth into the chain from the outside. Some of those things I just don't know yet, but if you're looking for it, people are raving about this. I've seen some really good videos where people have made full track patches using just the grid.
There was like a pretty interesting, if you check out like the Reddit subreddit for Bitwig is actually pretty comprehensive. But at one point they were doing like this cool, almost like the kind of Bitwig equivalent of like the 3 module challenge, where they basically said like, for like a 10 by 10 grid, what is the coolest patch you could fit in on here, right? Because each grid each thing has like a block size to it. So like they had a cool thing where it's like, okay, in 10 by 10, what is the coolest thing you can do? And they had some pretty interesting stuff on that. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty powerful. To your point, right? It's like Bitwig doesn't have a Macs for Live equivalent in terms of like kind of like a full open, kind of development environment. This is not that, but it's still pretty neat, and you can do a lot of stuff in it. I don't think it can do MIDI out at the moment, which is one of the. So from like integrating with a modular perspective, you can do the CV out stuff with the grid if you have DC coupled audio interfaces, but you can't convert it to MIDI and then back out to other things at the moment, which is a little annoying.
And I haven't dug in, but Bitwig 4 was just announced. They've got some really cool features for like what Bitwig calls operators, not the same as Ableton operators, which is like a little basic synth that you get, right? Like a 4-voice synth. Bitwig operators are like conditional modulators or conditional parameters for MIDI. Yeah. So you can go into a MIDI note and then say, I want this to repeat 4 times. So if you're making like a ratchet, or I want the probability to be 50%, or I want this to occur. I mean, I'm very excited for it for like drum sequencing.
Yeah, I haven't played with it yet too much, but what it reminded me a lot, just seeing the previews, is a lot of the stuff that the Electron sequencers are known for.
Yes.
In terms of like probability, chance, or like once every 4 beats, or once every 4 loops rather, stuff like that. It seemed like it can do a lot of that stuff, and have the ability, I think, to like modulate all that stuff with all of the Bitwig modulators as well, which gets really crazy really quick.
So yeah, they announced that and some comping, which Ableton already has, but Bitwig is playing a little bit of catch up in that. Just they've only been around half as long. So yeah, happy to stick around. I want to be respectful of time too, but I'm happy to go deeper. Stick around as long as people want to, or you can ping me after, ask questions.
I had a question. I saw that you had, is that the fader bank and the MIDI Street Fighter?
Yes.
Which do you use more often, and do you find that one has more capabilities than the other? Because I'm also transitioning, it seems like, more over to MIDI to control everything. So I was just curious which one you found more functional, or do you use them for different things?
Different things. So the fader, the 16 faders, that's right over here. Those I originally got because I was doing a lot of samples in Bitbox. And on the bigger Bitbox, there's not an easy way to like fade the volume in and out of each track unless you run those to like a mixer. So the fader does voltage. You can go 0 to 5, right? 0 to 10. So you can send voltage out, which is great. You can also send MIDI out. So in Bitbox, you can put it in learn mode on the volume, move the fader, and then it knows that that's what controls it. So it's essentially a little mixer for Bitbox. I use 8 of the channels for that. And then the other I would use to control levels that I might use a VCA for. So it saved me on like using something else in the VCA. If I was sending, I actually bought a cheap VCA that its only purpose is attenuating control voltage. And then the faders allow me to like change that over time. So if I want more of an impact of a tremolo or like less throughout a track, I can adjust that on the fly. And a lot of it is accessibility because I could go grab a knob and do that. But a lot of it's just trying to keep things here and not, for me, it's a little bit of an organization too. I can remember where those are versus like, knobs everywhere. MIDI Fighter Twister is what I map in the DAW to certain controls, and it's more like when I'm tracking things out, I've got, usually it's a filter cutoff, resonance, leveling for the different instruments, and I don't have to like turn around and be looking at the DAW at certain places to like turn knobs and do things. And then once I sketch something out, then I've got that modulation right in Bitwig. Then I no longer need the mapping on it. So it gives me a little bit better control than using the mouse to scroll and things like that.
Cool. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And one other thing that always comes up too, Nick actually showed me this. There's a third-party add-in, a script for Bitwig to use a push-to. So I use push-to for clip launching, for recording, for track volumes. I don't get too deep into like effects and things like that, but you can do that in there too. It, for my purposes, gives me 100% of the functionality that I would be using if I were in Ableton with the push. And that's usually while I'm like recording the video that we watched earlier, or like usually recording something, I'm usually mixing on the fly, just kind of fine tune mixing things just to, be hands-on with the arrangement as it's going. So
do you happen to have a link for the script, Eric, that maybe you could drop in the chat? I dropped some other links in the chat for you guys as well.
If you search Moss Grabber, I can post it in the chat too, but the script is really powerful because it's not just for the push-to. There's also like a whole bunch of other supported controllers that he basically created like custom Bitwig integrations for. The push-to one is interesting because it's like pretty close to feature parity with what you can get in Ableton with the push-to. In some ways, it's better and worse. And it does actually use the screen on the push-to, which is cool. So you get like a full UI and everything. It's not just like it's a dumb MIDI controller with lights.
Oh, that's cool. Can you see the racks? Like if you, for example, like.
You can. It's not as visually appealing as it is in Ableton, but it does work. So like it looks pretty kind of like lo-fi, if you will. But it is functional and it's pretty cool in that regard. So like you can do a lot of basically every feature you can do in Ableton, save for like, I'd say probably sampling is probably the biggest weakness from what I remember of messing around with it. Like it doesn't have the same kind of like sample UI because it can't show waveforms and stuff like that you can in Ableton. But if
you can do all the launching functions and things like that.
Right. If you're using it for like clip launching or even like MIDI editing and sequencing and stuff like that, you can use it. It works really well for that, from what I found. So
Very cool.
you can
Oh,
see
thanks for dropping the link too.
And the clips are all lighting up on my push as usually my workflow is I start in Clip Launcher, build these clips and these loops and things, and then I start to get an idea of how I'm going to arrange it. And then I'm either recording a live session, right, like you would, and then launching clips and kind of getting a rough idea of a sketch. And then I usually wipe it out of here and put everything into arrangement when I'm actually trying to finish something. But yeah, you see all the clips there that are showing up.
Can you start over and just kind of walk through like how you created the scene, or
Oh, sure.
or just
Like, so
oh, you just
I'll just delete these for a second. So tab, I'm pressing tab on the keyboard, right? Here's an arranger view. When I press tab, it brings you into the clip launcher. This would be pretty much synonymous with Ableton's workflow, right? So now I'm looking at all of my, instead of the tracks being on the left, the tracks are all up in the top, and I have a scene which can play one or none or multiple of a clip in any one of these. So if for my first scene is my opening scene, maybe I want those moving pads or these high pads, to play, and I want these chimes to play, and then that'll run for 8 bars, and then I'll move into another scene where I want those to repeat, but I'm going to add another clip over here. Usually I don't know this fast in my mind when I'm working, right? You're playing with things and adding voices as you go. But then you say, okay, that's really good. Now I want this to move on to the next part of the song. I'm going to drop these pads. I'm going to keep this voice, and I'm going to add another one over here or whatever. Then you can launch a scene on the left-hand side by pressing this, and I think this will launch the whole thing. It's not going to do anything because there's nothing in these clips to play. But if I were to put a note in one of these and launch it, you should be able to hear it if it plays. Right, and those will keep going for as long as you want to make those clips. So instead of that being 1 bar, you can make it 4 bars. Then I can launch that scene, right? Then I could launch the next scene by clicking this, or I could launch individual clips. So it really gives you the ability to kind of launch things in a very Lego block-like manner.
Yeah.
And if you're recording, which is really nice, it will record those launch points and those MIDI clips into the arrangement view. So over here, you can see these all grayed out now because I switched over. So if I play this from here, nothing's playing, but I'm going to hit record. Go back to my other thing. I'm going to launch scene 1. Notice it's quantized to the beat. So it'll launch right on the beat for me. And then I can say I'm going to cue this one up. As soon as this cycles through, it's going to now launch the second scene, and then that'll play for a while, and so on and so on. And then if I am done with this one, I can stop, this voice. So you see this one will stop, and this one will keep going. You could kind of fade out, if you will. But now if I go back to the arrangement view, those clip launching and stopping actions all get recorded into arrangement view. Then I can come back. There's a button. Ableton has a similar button right here. We're switching from the clip launcher being the priority to arranger now being the priority. Now all of a sudden I have my skeleton of a track, and I'll hit play. We're only going to hear that one chime.
Is it similar to Ableton in the sense that when you're in the scene view, for example, and you launch your scenes, and then you can go over to the arrangement view and select individual tracks that you want to play, but still continue to play from the scene view? Not to confuse you guys, but it's just...
Yeah, right. So if I wanted to draw out a MIDI clip here, oops. I can't do it in a folder.
I don't know if I explained myself well, so I'll say it again. So one of the cool things that you can do in Ableton, and as you can see, you can do in Bitwig, is that how he was saying if you work in the scene view, which is where the tracks are up top, and it's where you work in clip mode. say you're creating your ideas, and those clips will cycle forever. You know, if you push play, you could walk away, come back tomorrow, and they'll keep playing those in those loops. But once you move it to the arrangement view, it's the length of the arrangement. If you're in the scene view and you say you were writing the clips in Ableton, you can then go to the arrangement view, and you know the scene view is continuing to play. But now let's say you want to drag something over to one specific track in the arrangement view, you can then listen to the scene view to make those changes before you actually commit to the arrangement side, if that makes sense. Can you do that in Bitwig, or do you have to just, or does it go to all the tracks when you
Right.
jump to the arrangement view?
So I've been showing a one or the other. So here's the arrangement view. Here's the
Okay.
clip launcher view, right?
Right.
So, you know, or I think Ableton calls this the session view, right?
Yes, session view.
So I'm going to make sure this button is pressed here. So the arrangement view is the, I'll say I don't know a better way to say it, but it's the priority. And I'm going
Right.
to loop this section. And so now I'm going to play this. And let me make something shorter. Okay, so here's my whatever pad that's looping, right?
Right.
Instead of going back and forth, so if I switch over, that'll still keep playing here and I can launch clips, right?
You can launch clips. Okay.
Yep. Or I can keep this view open and click this little button and I can get kind of a split view. So let me put,
Nice.
here's my magneto. So let me put a note in here. So there's this clip. I'm gonna make it short so we'll hear it. Yeah. So now I can go like this. Now we'll quantize and start. So it's playing the arrangements, looping it,
Right.
and now it's playing this clip. So I'm like, nah, maybe I don't like that one, right? I'm gonna stop this one, come over here and say I want that to go up to, you know, F. So now I've got one here that I can name C, and this one I can name F, and I can see the difference between the two. So I can launch this one. And say, now I want to try F. See, it's blinking, tells me it's coming. And after this, now it's going to loop those. And now I can go back to F. So I kind of doing like a chord progression sort of accidentally, right? Another thing you can do on this track then, so on this clip, is instead of it just looping indefinitely, I can say, instead of looping it, play it, and after it's done, play the next one. So it'll play C for 4 bars, and then it'll go on to F. Then F will loop back to C again. So I essentially created like a chord progression through these clips that are there, if I wanted to do that. But
so, sorry, not to cut you off.
the
I was just
important
to
thing-
give the comparison to you guys. So you can do these things like how he was showing that follow. It's called follow actions in Ableton. So if you look at your clip in the scene mode, in the scene view, and you double click on a clip and you look at the bottom left, you'll see where it says follow actions, and that's where you can, you know, go play that clip twice, or go choose to go to the next clip or clip above it. That's where you would find those same selections. And in Ableton, so in Bitwig, how he has the split screens happening where you can see both the scene view and the arrangement view. In Ableton, if you go to the top menu, you can open up both of those windows separately. So you can see both windows at the same time too. Just so you can have some, I'm trying to give you guys comparisons here, just so to between both of the programs.
A lot of this functionality is going to be a different workflow, but you'll be able to do almost the same thing, right, in both of these. Like if somebody said, hey, I'm already an Ableton user, why would I switch to Bitwig? I'd go to things like, if the polygrid that we were looking at before, if that is interesting and Max for Live isn't doing it, the modulators, if you want to change up the workflow that's there. But if somebody's already proficient in Live saying, why should I switch to Bitwig?
Right.
You have to just try it out and see if you like the workflow better. Functionality wise, it's not like one's going to be, oh my gosh, I've been missing out on this. I can't do this in Live. And kind of even completing the thought where I was before, if I hit play, now this is here, I'm going to hit record, and I can now record this MIDI clip. clicked in there, right? So now if I come back out and I look in here, stop this, it's quiet. You can ignore the MIDI clip. This blank one is here because this was armed. If I had switched away from it, it wouldn't be there. So ignore this blank one. But you can see then at the time when I pressed that button, it recorded that clip in there. And I essentially can dynamically build out my arrangement view. And then I can switch back, make sure I click this button. Now that becomes sort of active committed, if you will, in arrangement view. And now I've got the beginning of an arrangement, moving. I can open this. This is similar to the, the lanes for modulation. And I could put different modulators in here for like volume levels or whatever else you might be doing, panning, things like that.
Travarsy, I just need to say, that's amazing, that option to open a second window. I've never looked at it, but because I thought it would just be like it's like another window you can kind of customize it. When you open it, yeah, so if you're on session view, it'll open the arrangement view, but at the same time when you click between the two, it'll swap them between the windows. So like if my main window is on session view and I want to change my main window to arrangement, it'll change on the main window, but then on the second window, it'll do the vice versa. So it's like, yeah, that's awesome.
I actually have one more thing to show that I meant to show earlier. So and I left this arranged this way for this conversation. Typically in workflow, once I have an idea of a voice and everything sounds good and it's great, I'm going to commit the audio because I either may want to repatch something differently or do something different with hardware, but I want to commit the audio. So you can bounce a clip. I know Ableton has freeze functionality. Bitwig has this bounce concept. So I can take a MIDI clip that's here. So here's this voice. Remember this voice was playing, it was like, except for it's not in. But anyway, here's this MIDI clip. If I just play this MIDI clip, this is at the end. Oops. Remember that voice? So if I take this clip, I can right click and I can say bounce and I can choose real time. So it will actually play this through real time like you're tracking. And I'm going to take that pre-fader. I could also take it pre-FX in the FX chain or post-FX, post-fader. But I'm going to take it pre-fader and say okay. So it's playing the modular right now. You're going to hear the whole track, but it's recording this orange new audio track. And this works because it was set up as a hardware instrument or an instrument track. Like Ableton could do this too. I think Ableton can do like a commit to audio. You might have to do a little bit of routing in there, but you could do similar functionality. So now I've got committed audio. I can take this track that has the MIDI and everything on it. I can just completely disable that track, come back here, and now I say I have audio now. Really cool thing with Bitwig is these tracks can be hybrid. I can take audio and drop it onto a MIDI track, and it can do both MIDI and audio. So I can commit a portion and still play with another portion, or sometimes I'll leave this as a second, like, kind of like making a backup. Because since I can't save presets in modular, this is my way of like, I'll just commit to audio and then I have it in case I need to patch, do something differently, or I turn a knob the wrong way and I lose what I had. But it is nice, you can put it all in one track too. So you can have a single MIDI and audio that's there.
Gibson, you're still in here. With the Ableton 11, did they add that as a feature by any chance, or no? I haven't really dug in.
I missed the first part. Did they add what?
Did they add this feature that Bitwig has where you can play both audio and MIDI on the same track?
Play audio and MIDI on the same track. I'm not sure if I follow.
Like how he just demonstrated that he has a MIDI track and then he was able to bounce that specific piece of MIDI to commit it to audio.
Oh,
And then he's now able to play both the audio and the MIDI on the same channel.
I see. Yeah, on the same channel, no. The closest thing I could think of would be to freeze. And then once it's frozen, you can drag the frozen clip down, which commits it to audio, but then you have them existing on two separate tracks, one MIDI and one audio.
Got it. It's still that. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I haven't really dug into that part of to check to see on Ableton 11. So, but I figured since you're
it's like a minor thing to have two tracks and have them grouped, and then have your FX at the group level, right? You could put, you can group then these two tracks together. One, if I did something like this, one time this MIDI plays, one time the audio plays, but they're all part of this group. That's why all my FX are at that group level.
Right.
So depending if I commit something or what's going to happen tomorrow, I'm going to go and commit this all to audio, rip all the patch cables, and then finish my mixing and things later.
Nice.
But that's a cool feature that it's nice to have that.
This has been great, Eric. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing this workflow with the group.
Yeah, I mean, happy to. And I'm on Discord, I'm on email. I mean, shoot me a note too. I'm happy to chat anytime. I might have more questions from people than answers, though.
Well, that's a great thing about Modulation Sound Lab and all the other Discords, and that is that you're always learning. You're either sharing information or getting information, which I think is great. I also, if everyone scrolls to the top of the chat, I dropped in the link to his YouTube channel and to his Instagram. In case you're not already following him, you should definitely check it out. And I dropped in the links to the ring and tip adapter, along with 1/4 to 1/8 inch cables, just for Hosa, just to kind of get you pointed in a direction. If you have a specific other brand, at least know what you're looking for. And thanks, Nick, for dropping in that script. That link for that script for the push to, in that case anybody is interested in checking it.
Christian found it too.
Oh, Christian, sorry, Christian Mueller. Thanks, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I just know it because he also enabled it for Reaper, so I used it for Reaper when I still had a push.
Very cool. And then I found some other link in there I dropped in Reddit, like something. I know you guys were talking about potentially not having MIDI out, but I don't know what that is, so I dropped it in there. We can explore it. Or if
I remember it, somebody basically had come up with like a workaround where you can, like, using the grid and like a combination of various modulators, convert the grid output to MIDI. But it was definitely a workaround. I don't think it was super ideal, but.
Got it. Okay. Very cool. Does anybody have any additional, like, last questions before we wrap it up?
This was cool and helpful. I have dabbled with the hybrid, and then I went back and I've been stubbornly using analog sequencers and pushing that, but I always figured that I would come back to hybrid before I did an advanced sequencer. This is encouraging. I really like what you're doing. I like the idea of making modular voices. And that's why I'm not using a laptop now very much, except for post-processing, but I'm actually not trying to get away from it. And so it was really cool to see this world laid out. Thanks for that.
Nice. Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this.
Thanks for having me. This is a great
workflow. This is a true hybrid setup you have going here. Fantastic.
Sometimes I wonder if it's too much hybrid for the sake of hybrid, but no, it works great. It's all the tools at your disposal, whatever you want to do with it, kind of one central.
As you said, whatever makes you make music, right?
That's my t-shirt. Computer, hardware, modular, or whatever, all of it intertwined together.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for joining and for the questions and conversation.